So today we have a special guest, Malati. Malati is going to give a class today. Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna. So yes, thank you very much for our request for you to give class. Oh, and it was so nice to see you at the Rath Yatra a few weeks ago.
It was a wonderful Rath Yatra.
Yeah. Lower the microphone, lower the speaker down there. Yeah. It's okay now. Okay, it's okay. Everybody have a seat and face the screen. A Zoom class. Everybody have a seat. Face the screen. No, you got to face the screen. Okay. Okay. Come closer, everyone. Come close. Come closer.
A question: How many of the participants? I have a question: Is how many of the participants in the audience are? So is my voice audible to you? Oh, yeah, I am.
Is your thing muted?
You're asking
I
me-
hear you, Malati. I hear you okay.
Okay, but I'm like, you're directly on Zoom, I guess. Can the people in the temple hear?
If she can hear us, then maybe she hears.
If you can hear, just raise your hand. Or maybe you don't speak English. So well, I'll do my best to try to carry on here. So, well, I want to respectful obeisances to all of the assembled devotees, those of you in the temple, those of you online, etc. And what is that microphone for? Anyways, I wanted to mention a verse from the Srimad Bhagavatam. So, Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya, Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya, Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So this is a verse from the 11th canto, 230. I'm just going to read the actual verse. One is the topic of the verse. In this case, well, I'll explain. The verse is, even a single moment's association pure devotees, or even a half a moment's association. I'm going to shut off my video because I just got a message from my computer that the internet's unstable, which I know it is. And so if I turn off the video, it might make it, hopefully it'll continue running. So in this 11th canto 230, it's a verse that has been mentioned in other situations, or a variation of other situations, but it's about associating with a pure devotee. So this particular quote here from 11.230 is, even a single moment's association with the pure devotees, or even half a moment's association, is sufficient to give one the perfection of life. And so then the same mood of association is also mentioned in other shastras, even in the Chaitanya Charitamrita. A moment's association with a pure devotee is mentioned, this Levamatra. And for us, that, okay, so somebody's saying you cannot see me anymore. That's correct. My mute is, hear me, it's from your end. So I don't do that. But you can't see me because I turned off the video because my internet is unstable. And when I get that message, there's a good chance it'll cut out. So if I shut off the video, it works a little bit better. So I'm sorry about that. I mean, I can turn the video on, but then it may all the way shut off. So let's just see what happens here just for a little bit. So this idea of a moment's association from a pure devotee is so valuable. And just by that moment's association, one can make heaps and leaps and bounds of spiritual advancement. That's what's so wonderful about it. Now, sometimes people might say, well, I've had many moments, many lavaspatras, many moments of association with pure devotees, particularly if you're a Prabhupada disciple and you have spent time with Srila Prabhupada, significant time, and still you may find you're not quite on the highest platform of spiritual awareness and love of God. How is that? So that explanation is given by Srila Prabhupada himself to one young disciple who had that question in mind. So I've spent so much time with you, Prabhupada, and still I'm not, so advanced. So Prabhupada was explaining wood can create a fire. Within wood, there is fire. But if the wood is wet, it will take longer for the fire to start. The fire is still there, but it's damp. By the damp wood, it will be very difficult to immediately start a fire. So you have to wait for the wood to dry out a bit. So many of us, particularly in the beginning, we were damp logs. We were wet logs. And according to our determination, according to our faith, according to our quality of surrender, according to our practice of Krishna consciousness, we will find ourselves at different degrees of in Krishna consciousness. Some devotees, I'm sure many of you have met wonderfully remarkable devotees who are highly advanced, and just by being in their presence, you are reminded of Krishna and encouraged to move on in your Krishna consciousness. And other devotees, they're very nice and you're happy to be with them, but there is no particular spiritual spark that you feel yet. And that's because they're still, the wet wood stage. But if we keep trying, if we just keep on with our spiritual practice called sadhana and chanting, hearing and chanting. Eventually that wet wood dries out, and eventually the spiritual fire, the blazing spiritual fire will come forth. And of course, Srila Prabhupada was so exemplary in this regards. So I wanted to speak about Srila Prabhupada today because Srila Prabhupada is not an ordinary spiritual master. One time, when asked about his own spiritual master, Srila Prabhupada said he was not an ordinary man. He saved me. And each one of us who have come in contact with Srila Prabhupada, whether personally, directly or indirectly, through other devotees, through his books, through videos, we are left feeling that he was not an ordinary man. He has saved us, or he is saving us. And there were different instances. Whenever Prabhupada would come to a particular temple, there would be hundreds of devotees coming just to get that moments of association. And I came across a little narration by one devotee whose name was Nityananda Das. And he was telling his personal experience of Srila Prabhupada coming to Detroit in July of 1961. And it so nicely typifies the mood of what was going on when Prabhupada was present and what would happen when the devotees would find out that he was coming somewhere, what they would do and how they would do it, how they would get ready. So Prabhupada had been in India for many months, and the New Orleans temple heard that he was coming for 1 month to take a 1-month tour in America. He had been in Moscow. So he was returning, and his itinerary was Los Angeles, San Francisco, Rath Yatra, Haribol, Detroit, and New York before returning again to India. So the temple president was considering where to go, and he wanted to take the devotees, or at least a few or a couple of them, from New Orleans to Detroit. He decided to go to Detroit. It was the closest, although it was still about 1,000 miles away. But he had joined there 2 years earlier. And now just consider this. 2 years before, which would have been 1969, he joined the temple in in Detroit. And now here it was, July 1971, and he was a temple president. You can see things really moved along quite quickly in those days. So he was thinking, I want to see my old friends in Detroit, like Narottamananda, Bhagavan, Jagadish, Lakshmi Narayan, Sri Govinda, and others. And at that point, Detroit had become a major new North American center, and new devotees were just being made, like Prabhupada sometimes would say, like wildfire, under the charismatic leadership of Bhagavan Das. So it was decided they would go, and Bhaktin Betty, who was chosen to stay behind and watch over the small temple in the absence of the able to go. So they drove in a small car, not about in origin in the temple, not sure if you understand English well, not sure how some of these descriptions may be something you'll understand. So they had a 1965 Volkswagen Beetle. It was a very small car, but very favored among young people for many reasons. One being they would run for a long time and they were not so expensive. So this little Volkswagen Beetle was green, had no front bumper, the right window shield wiper was missing, and there was no rear seat, and no insurance, expired plates, a cracked window shield. The only thing I can say was it just kept going. So they drove up Interstate 55 from New Orleans to Detroit, And they arrived there on July 16th, 1971, and they went straight to the airport. Within 1 hour, Prabhupada would be arriving. So at the airport, in those days, there was no TSA. You just could go in, right on in, whoever wanted to go in. When I met Prabhupada in 1967, January in San Francisco, there was approximately 50 people from devotees, not so many, because we were the starters of the show there, but a few from New York, Allen Ginsberg, who was a poet of sorts and had some interest in chanting, and heard about this Swami was coming to town, and they wanted to see him. And myself and my soon-to-be husband, within the next couple of days, Sham Sundar, we had a dog, and the dog was right there with everybody else. You could just walk in like that in those days. So the devotees had brought this great big huge Vyasa sign on a 4-foot high platform, and they set it up in an alcove waiting area just off the main corridor inside the airport. And one devotee had made a very high gloss white painted A-frame book stand to show Prabhupada's books. And the paint was still drying, so it had quite, strong odor. But they had just heard recently that Prabhupada had emphasized he wanted his books displayed at every public function. So here they were at the airport, and there was the Vyasa sign and all of Prabhupada's books, and about at least 100 devotees and guests. And the kirtan just jumped right into high gear and strength as Srila Prabhupada suddenly came into sight. I don't know if anybody present can have the experience of being there when Prabhupada suddenly appeared, but if you did, you do know how just amazing that seemed. So he appeared at the top of the moving escalator, and it was like he was floating inches off the floor, moving forward and effort. He looked like he was floating. People, when devotees are describing seeing Prabhupada for the first time, they'll say that it looked like he was floating. I had that same experience in San Francisco on January 17th of 67. We're at that airport, and the first amazing thing, interesting thing is, can you hear the peacocks? At the end of the day, and they're saying their good nights. So somehow we hadn't been taught anything yet, like obeisances. We didn't even know Namo Vishnu Padaya yet. I don't know if anybody knew it yet. Very, very new. And we're waiting, we're looking, and suddenly there was this blast, like a blast of light, and it kind of blinded me for a moment, and I thought it was coming from the cameras of the reporters. In those days, the newspaper reporters, of which there were a few, had these big box cameras with giant like headlights. It was almost like as big as a headlight there to flash. So I thought that blinding light was from the reporter's flash bulb, but then I realized, no, they're behind me. And then I blinked and I realized that here was this small, amazingly effulgent personality. And that blinding light was coming from His Divine Grace, Srila Prabhupada, who had just exited the airplane. So in the same way, these devotees are seeing him. He's appearing at the top of the escalator, and he seemed to float. So I also had that feeling. And somehow or other, I found myself on the floor. Many devotees describe this. Sachinanda Swami, he describes in one of his books, finding himself on the floor without any intention to be there. I'm on the floor, wondering how I got on the floor, what happened. And suddenly, right in front of my eyes, these white pointy-toed rubber shoes came floating by. And I kind of looked up and I saw this extremely brilliant personality. And up until that moment, we had not seen any pictures. And of course, you don't, when somebody asks you, tells you about a new person in your life or who would be in your life, you generally don't say, how tall is he? So we had never asked that question, had no idea. But we were thinking he must be really tall and really big because he was a Swami, and we just assumed that Swamis are big and tall. But he was so small. And he was so gracefully floating. He was so brilliant. So back to Detroit, the devotees became overwhelmed with spiritual emotions, finally being in the personal association of a pure devotee for the first time for many of them. And there was just really loud exclamations, Jai Prabhupada. By that time, Prabhupada, the term Prabhupada was used. When I first saw Srila Prabhupada, of course, we were still calling him Swamiji, or, Swamiji. But by 71, Prabhupada, Jai Prabhupada. And it was resounding among the chaotic melee of stunned, overwhelmed, crying, jubilant, blissful devotees. And the passerbys were looking like totally amazed at this otherworldly spectacle, something you don't normally see in an airport. And without any hesitation, without any self-consciousness, Prabhupada very nimbly climbed up onto the seat, which was shaded by an umbrella. He settled on the cushions. He glanced around with a great gravity. And he was the only person there who was calm and composed. And he had a slight smile. And the kirtan stopped, and Prabhupada recited the Prema Davani prayers. And again, the devotees, oh, glories to Srila Prabhupada, Jai Srila Prabhupada. And then Bhagavan Das placed a huge garland of fragrant roses around Srila Prabhupada's neck, visibly shedding tears. And the person who was reporting this said it was maybe the first time I'd ever seen a man crying in happiness. Here was our loving spiritual master, the topmost guru, and the tears were contagious. So Srila Prabhupada then very nonchalantly, he raised a long-stemmed silver goblet, and he just gracefully tilted his head back, and he sent a crystal clear stream of water pouring into the air, like it was at least a foot from his mouth, and yet he just opened his mouth slightly, and this stream of water with precision, without a spilled drop or any hint of miscalculation, just glided into his mouth. And it happened so quickly that it was like an amazing spectacle of graceful perfection. Like, how many people here, you try to drink, you open your mouth and you tilt your head back and you try to pour some water in without touching the rim of the cup. And inevitably some dribbles down or even falls on your chest or your doti or sari, I mean, for most people. I'm sure some of you are much more together on that. But when you see something like this for the first time, it's like a mystical thing, like a mystical control over the natural elements. And his index and pinky fingers were extended, Goloka style. And another devotee, Rochan Das, held up a painting of Lord Nisringadev to tribute to a special occasion, and probably at the book display, smiling or nodding. And then he began an arrival address right there in the airport. He said, it's become very satisfactory that so many boys and girls are taking part in this great Krishna consciousness movement. It's a very important movement because it is correcting the human civilization there's a great defect in the modern civilization, and people are accepting this body as self. And based on this mistake in the foundation, everything is going wrong. Years and years and years ago, I mean, decades ago, really, there was a little short movie out. It was called Koyaanisqatsi. Not so many people maybe would know that. Koyaanisqatsi. It means world out of tilt, out of kilt. World out, the world's out of tilt, it's out of kilter. And it was based in Africa, and an airplane was flying over, and the pilot was a little plane, and the pilot was drinking a bottle of Coca-Cola. In those days, they were like these green Coca-Cola bottles, and he just tossed it out, and it landed in the sand, and it didn't break. People, native people came up, and they were like, "Whoa, something, something from the heavens has fallen," and they're practically worshiping this bottle. But in the meantime, there's, that was indicating, some of the elders could see that this was not natural, and it was indicating that unnatural things were to come. And that's just a fact. And this great defect in modern civilization, Prabhupada said this movement's important because it can correct the human civilization. And the basic principle of civilization, the basic mistaken principle is accepting this body as the soul. And Prabhupada said, this is the beginning of all problems. And the great philosophers and scientists, theologists, and thoughtful men, they don't know what is the defect. And then he mentioned, recently I was in Moscow. I had a talk with a big professor of Indology, Professor Kotovsky. So he was speaking that Swamiji, after finishing this anila of this body, everything is finished. Prabhupada said, I was so astounding himself. As a very advanced person has no idea. Oh, migrating from one body to the other. Everyone is accepting this body as a self. And they're thinking there is no life after death. Therefore, make the best use of this bad bargain and enjoy sense gratification as far as possible. So that's the miscalculation of the human condition. This Prabhupada was speaking in 71, and has anything changed? It's, what is it, 2022? But he went on. This Krishna consciousness movement is checked. Our proposition is that you are not this body. You are spirit soul. Some way or other, you are in contact with this material world, and you have got this material body, and under illusion, you are accepting something which you are not. So the basic principle of this Krishna consciousness movement is to correct the wrong foundation of human civilization. Sorry. In the Bhagavad Gita, this is the beginning of spiritual knowledge. So when Arjuna was identifying himself with this body and bodily relationship, first thing did, Krishna corrected that. You're not this body. So if we don't understand progress, imagine you're in an airport and this is being spoken by an incredibly effulgent personality in this great, big, huge Vyasa sign with hundreds of persons with shaved heads and saris and dhotis. It's like maybe these people thought they'd gotten off on another planet. And Prabhupada continued. According to Vedic medicine or Vedic anatomy, it is made of 3 elements: the body, mucus, bile, and air. Tri Dhatu. Apart from that medical science, this body, one who accepts this body as self, and Swadi Kalad Tradishu, and persons in relationship with the body as kinsmen. We, our own men, Bhuma Ijadi, and the land where we take our birth is worshipable. Soeva Go Kara. He is accepted as Go Kara. Go means cow and Kara means ass. That means animal. The animal they cannot accept on not this body, but human form of life, which is so advanced in knowledge. And then suddenly there was an announcement, and it cut over the airport public address system. Ladies and gentlemen, I have to ask you to clear the boarding area so we can start our flight. So Prabhupada acknowledged, all right, then we shall stop. And once again, the devotees explained, oh, glories to Srila Prabhupada. And once again, the speaker, ladies and gentlemen, I have to ask you to clear the boarding area. So apparently the devotees had set up the Vyasa sign in Prabhupada's reception impromptu. In other words, they didn't make prior plans, they just came in and did it. So Prabhupada dismounted from his Vyasa sign seat. The kirtan began again, and the devotees surrounded him while proceeding down the corridors towards the terminal exit. And it was a really joyous parade with bold singings and mridangas drumming. And the departure of the devotees from the airport was pretty chaotic because they were racing they wanted to get to the temple in time for Prabhupada's arrival ceremony, which would be even bigger than at the airport, because every second of association with the Mahabhagavat pure devotee was infinitely valuable. No one wanted to miss any of it. And Nityananda Prabhu, who was giving his experience here, he mentioned that I had already prepared for this maneuver by studying a city map. Now, how many people nowadays would study a city map? We just like pull out our device and get on Google or get on Waze and push a button and away we go. But he had to study a paper map. He memorized the best route to the temple through America's 5th largest city, Detroit. He was thinking, I'm not going to get lost or delayed in having to find directions. So his heart was pounding, and he got to the temple ahead of everybody else. And what happened when he was getting ready to leave, he couldn't find his wife. He couldn't see where she was. So he just left without her, figuring, okay, she'll get with the other devotees, which of course she did. But now he's there before everybody else, and he's feeling a little sorry that he actually did leave his wife behind. And he parked on the side street, and then he could see there was this grand reception forming in the front of the temple. At the temple at that time, it's not what we have now. It was a large 2-story brick building with a raised basement and attic dormiera, and it was on Jefferson Avenue. It had been once a very upscale mansion, but now it was converted to Krishna's service. And car after car was arriving back from the airport ahead of Srila Prabhupada, because everybody wanted to be there before he was there to cheer and make their obeisances. So they were running around last minute preparations, and devotees were coming from St. Louis, from New Vrindavan, from Buffalo, New York, from New York City, Toronto, Canada, Montreal, Canada, so many places that gathered all over USA and Canada, coming to Detroit to see Srila Prabhupada on his return to America. And then he soon arrived. And again, people were crying, Jai Prabhupada, Jai Prabhupada. And then the kirtan began, Namo Vishnupadaya. Like in those days, we would never think of starting a kirtan without Prabhupada's pranams first. And then there was a huge garland of multicolored roses, and they'd arranged for a bolt of white muslin cloth that was laid from the street, the temple entrance, into the temple room, right up to the Vyasa sign, kind of like a transcendently antiseptic royal carpet. And Prabhupada, he was smiling pleasantly, and he was walking slowly with his cane. Rose water was being sprinkled in the front. Rose petals were being sprinkled on the path just ahead of every step. And then when he reached the temple stairs, rose petals from above started falling down, and Prabhupada looked up, and there were the devotee ladies on the balcony, and they were chanting, Jai Prabhupada, Jai Prabhupada. So showering continued in, but now it's reserved for there is one gentleman who's very, very much captivated by Lord Jagannath. And he hears that every Rath Yatra, when we get to the parade Rath Yatras in a little area off of Detroit, right off of the city called Novi, outside the city. And so when the deities have arrived, and before they're taken off of the Rath Yatra cart, there's this helicopter goes up, and suddenly you cannot imagine how many roses just start falling from the sky, showering over the deities in the throne on the cart, showering all over the devotees who are just chanting in ecstasy. And so it's actually always makes me remember how when Prabhupada would come to places where there was a balcony, how the rose petals would fall upon his lotus head. So Prabhupada entered the large temple hallway and mounted his Vyasa sign. And then the devotees began spilling in the crowded room and crowding the room. And kirtan was increasing in intensity. And more devotees began to dance in front of their spiritual father. And somebody had brought a pair of large wampers. And it was the first time the devotees had actually seen these huge kartals in the States. So it was getting very jubilant, and Prabhupada began devotees with their obvious ecstasy and devotion. Prabhupada smiling and nodding. In response, they became surcharged, and the kirtan leapt forward to another level of intensity, created with spiritual electricity. Srila Prabhupada's smile became larger and larger and larger, and his eyes are opening like large silver dollars. We used to call these the saucer eyes, when his eyes would get so large they could not possibly get any larger. And we knew when we saw those eyes that, well, it was one of two things. He was really, really pleased, or he was super surprised. The first time I saw those large eyes was at my initiation. It was the first initiation in San Francisco. And it was probably the third initiation, third or fourth initiation. First was 66 in New York for Janmashtami. Second one was New York Janmashtami, and it might have been the third one. So ours was either the fourth one or it could have been the third one, but January 67, San Francisco. And we didn't know a whole lot. Nowadays, everybody knows everything before it happens. You know, we're well trained. All the information is present. Senior devotees are there and make sure you know everything. But at that point in 1967 January, the senior devotees were probably about 3 minutes older than the rest of us. You know, they didn't know a whole lot more themselves. So what happened was, I mean, a few things kind of funny happened. One was when they gave us the bananas, we didn't know what to do with them. So we started peeling them. And then right away, no, they go in the fire. Okay, we put them in the fire. And then we heard Prabhupada say something. Swamiji was saying something like we couldn't quite understand, bodom, because first of all, it was just a surcharge situation. It was a small storefront filled with all kinds of people and people trying to chant, and we all didn't have the mantra in the right order yet. So the chanting was going on, but it wasn't particularly, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. It was all kind of scrambled up, but chanting going on. And Srila Prabhupada's English was still heavily accentuated. And in those days, we had this idea that you had to use a lot of incense. I mean, like a lot. Nowadays, there's this like incense phobia where you can only have one piece of incense, and sometimes they even break that in half. Incense. So, but then tons of incense. So there was incense smoke, but we just had a fire yagya. So then there was all that smoke. So you actually, Prabhupada was sitting across from us at the yagya, but we couldn't even see him with all the smoke. So then he's saying, Bodon, Bodon, and we don't know what is he saying. And then out of the four of us who were initiated, myself, Shamsundar, Haridas, and Harsharani, Haridas was an artist. He had come from New York, and somehow he thought he knew what we should do. So he leaned forward, and we just did what he did. He was going to be our temple president, so you should follow your temple president. Okay, so we leaned forward, and then he started blowing on the fire, like really enthusiastically blowing on that fire. And we all did the same thing. And when we blew on the fire, it kind of made a little parting of the smoke. And there was Srila Prabhupada Swamiji sitting with these great, big, huge eyes. Like, nobody knows what you're thinking, but one thing was he understood, we didn't understand, and now was not the time to explain it. So he just picked up his kartals and started chanting the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra. Circumstance, Srila Prabhupada always knew the perfect thing to do, bow down. That gives you an idea of the level of that's what I mean about this. So I'm going to shut off the video. Even though I shut the video, we went off again. So I don't know, where was I in the narration when it went off? How, anybody remember?
You blew on the fire.
Okay, so yeah, I'll shut this off again and hope we don't get knocked off again. So we're blowing on that fire, and when we blew on the fire, it pushed the smoke aside, and through that smoke, which was pushed aside, we could see Swamiji's beautiful face. And we saw for the first time, at least I saw for the first time, those great, big, large, round saucer eyes, big round eyes. And we understood this was blowing on the fire was not what he had in mind. And he could understand that we did not understand what he was saying. And now was not the time to try to explain it. So he picked up his kartals and he began a kirtan. Quite often in those days when things were just beyond our comprehension, that was always the solution, to begin a kirtan. He had been trying to tell us to bow down. So that can give you an idea of our level of maturity, which was not very mature at all. You know, you couldn't even call us Kanishta. We were like pre-Kanishta, means very, 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 very new, pre-neophyte. And that he would have to tell, yes, you should bow down. We didn't even know that. And he was so merciful to us that he just accepted us in all of our inadequate, with all of our inadequacy, he accepted us as his initiated disciples. So back to Detroit, this kirtan's going on, and Prabhupada is getting he's smiling hugely, but he's getting these big eyes. He called silver dollar eyes. And the kirtan further intensified. And it was beyond all previously experienced limits. And now everyone was jumping straight up and down. No more blissful swaying from side to side, which was how the kirtans were, these beautiful, gentle, mellow side to side kirtans. Everybody, it was called the Swami step. Now everybody was up and down, straight up and down. And Srila Prabhupada's exultant face beamed. He was radiating supreme bliss from ear to ear. And the sight of Srila Prabhupada's supremely gleaming spiritual super smile with his eyes expanded fully wide open was enough to cause everyone to abandon all self-consciousness, just forgetting who or where you were. And as the singing morphed into Jai Prabhupada, something truly amazing happened. And I've heard this, Nityananda is telling a story about, I have heard it from others who were there, that this amazing moment, the thought of which gives people the flutters 50 years later, that a qualitative change in the time and space and continuum precipitated, and the spiritual dimension opened up, as though Srila Prabhupada's ecstasy had forced back the heavy curtain of Maya that was ordinarily surrounding our lives, and devotees simply became delirious, crying, floating, merged into kirtan, thick with emotion and affection for Srila Prabhupada. He was obviously very happy with his disciples' happiness in Krishna consciousness, and they were so blissful to be with him again. They were just focused intently upon his spiritual physical form, and they were no longer on Jefferson Avenue. They were no longer in Detroit. They were not even on planet Earth. They were in the spiritual realm. I'm sure that probably most devotees have had one of those moments, or even more, when a kirtan suddenly takes you to another level, another dimension, and you realize you're no longer in the material world. I remember for the installation of the Panchatattva deities in Mayapur, it was a pretty intense situation. And they had expected 5,000 people. They thought they were prepared for 5,000 people, but there was even more than that. And the kirtan was going continuously, and it became like otherworldly. And for the first time, I experienced this profound moments. Like we hear Lord Chaitanya say, a moment is like 12 years more. Like time was not part of the picture anymore. And there was no envy in the room. It was just Krishna's name, Krishna's name, Krishna's name. And the devotees were so beautifully blissful. And there was no envy. There was no anxiety. It was like surreal. It was wonderful. So that was their experience. And then Nityananda said, without any conscious decision or effort, I was bouncing, springing up and down as a weightless, with chills and shivers crawling over my body. And the short hairs on my head tingled, and my body awareness was altered. And I now felt clearer and lighter than ever before, as though afloat in the ethereal waters of a living dream. There was a profound absence of all the subtle aches, itches, pains, and discomforts of wearing a gross body that accompanied us throughout life like a heavy necklace. In a second, my consciousness transformed into a profoundly clean happiness. No more anxiety. Time stopped. Srila Prabhupada was giving us some mercy by sharing his spiritual bliss, a taste of the ocean of pleasure of Krishna consciousness. He was blessing us with a miracle, the experience of the transcendental field of purified consciousness. And it was a totally incomparable to any previous life event. So then gradually that episode was subsiding. Prabhupada's smile was kind of receding, and the kind of the weight of the bodily identification was returning, but the kirtan continued and devotees were assimilated. They were assimilating their metaphysical encounter. But everyone was deeply moved and feeling fully convinced of the supramundane reality. And people were feeling, I'll always follow Srila Prabhupada. And in spite of any residual conditioning and fading attachments, the so-called worldly pleasures, they just seemed pitifully pale in the light of this wonderful, brief moment with the pure devotee of the Lord. So how did Prabhupada do this? He gave us a drop from the ocean of bliss, just as Lord Vishnu had encouraged Narada Muni with a short vision of his original spiritual form. So then the kirtan ended, and the devotees attempted to offer obeisances in the crowded room. You know how it is when you're all smushed together. There's just like no floor space to kneel. You just stand with folded hands. And there were those who were standing because they couldn't bow down. They just gazed at Srila Prabhupada as he recited prayers to the predecessor gurus and also various holy places. And then Prabhupada, he asked for the windows to be open for ventilation. And he noted there are so many devotees. And he declared this material advancement of civilization is not knowledge. It was hedonism out of ignorance. In our real business, we were simply trying to decorate the apartment and live comfortably. But death will come and evict us all. Prabhupada brought laughter to the devotees when he described three kinds of persons: the bogi, the rogi, and the yogi. And he described how we were all eternal living entities, part and parcel of Krishna. And as such, we also share his nature of seeking pleasure and enjoyment. And he quoted the verse from Brahma Samhita 5:37, where every effort is being made here to suppress a distress condition and to reach to the platform of happiness. The whole struggle is there. Why are people running by this way and that way in a motor car? The background is to be happy. How to become happy? But they're just planning, I shall be happy in this way. I shall be happy in that way. Like there's an advertisement. Come on, and they have some, undressed ladies' pictures they're inviting. Come on, you'll be happy. So Prabhupada was realizing that our real business was to solve the problem of not finding happiness despite searching for it life after life and getting frustrated instead. It was a matter of restoring our constitutional healthy condition, not to try to find comfort in this temporary material world. Even if there's difficulties, a serious man will tolerate them while remaining fixed on the purpose of human life. So in my first meeting there was Srila Prabhupada in San Francisco, 67 January. We came from the airport to the little temple. Most of the temples in those days were kind of little. And he was sitting on a little platform that Shyam Sundar had built. We didn't even know the word Vyasa sign at that point. We just said Dayas. And there was a little pillow that somebody had taken off of a discarded sofa from the street. We had no idea of spiritual culture and how to treat the spiritual master. So some discarded sofa, and they brought the cushion in, and now that was what Prabhupada was sitting on. And most of the people in the room were some form of hippies. And hippies, they were searching for happiness. They were searching for love. Just like we would say, we will fold our hands. We fold our hands and we say, we'll say like, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna. So the hippies were going, peace and love, brother. Peace and love, sister. Making this was a symbol, peace and love, peace and love. The one looking for love, but not finding it. And then Prabhupada said something that was kind of an astounding thing to say to these people. He goes, there is no love in the material world. And that could have been like a really heavy statement. I mean, it was a heavy statement. But in those days, we'd sometimes say, oh, that was a downer. But nobody felt down, because then he began to wonderfully explain where and what and how and why you could find real love. That real love was emanating from the source of love, Lord Sri Krishna. And it was eternal. It was the eternal blissful condition of the soul. So we were all products of Srila Prabhupada's mercy. I'm sure that some of you might have been there in Berkeley when Srila Prabhupada was present, and may have some stories to tell. Prabhupada wound up his talk to the devotees. I'm very happy to see you all, American boys, Indians. This is wanted. We want to unite the whole world under this Krishna consciousness movement. And actually, it's happening. In our society, we have devotees from all sections of people, Christians, Jews, Hindus, Mohammedan, black, white. It doesn't matter, because we are seeing, according to Bhagavad Gita, Pandita Samadarshana, a learned man sees every living entity on the equal level. And he noted that our process of chanting Hare Krishna was simple, it was free, it wasn't a secret, and everyone without hard and fast rules could take part. He said, it's practical. So this is our request, that you all take full advantage of this center. So in the same way, take full advantage of the beautiful Berkeley Center. You come here and be helped by the devotees. Come regularly. He said, please come regularly. Take advantage of it. Thank you very much. And of course, the devotees all chanted, Jai Srila Prabhupada. So we can also, oh, I'm out of it again. Am I or not? I don't know. Is it still going on? Is it still recording? I mean,
It's still live. It's still live. It's still, you can still hear it.
Hare Krishna. I can see you now. So anyway, thank you for letting me say a few words. I'm hoping it was somewhat relatable. They weren't my words, it was Srila Prabhupada's, and the narration was from Nityananda Prabhu. But when you hear from devotees that have had that direct association and experience with Srila Prabhupada, it is so contagious, you want to share it. And that's how I felt when I was reading this earlier today.
Any questions, Malati? Do you have any questions?
Hare Krishna, I'd like to ask a question, if I may. Can I ask a question, Malati?
Sure. What, can you say your name again?
My name's Loka Bandhu Ramadas.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. If it's not too personal, I was just curious if you've had any association with Prabhupada in dreams.
Actually, yes. It happened actually, Prabhupada was present in San Francisco in January of '67. So he was even present. But both myself and Sham Sundar separately had these dreams. And ocean, and you know where the Golden Gate Bridge is? So I was down by on the ground.
The audio is stopping.
What?
The audio, it's kind of intermittent.
She can hear you now.
Internet's getting unstable again, I think. Can you
Yeah.
hear me now or not?
On and off.
I think it's not.
We heard you were
Well,
talking in
this-
1967.
He answered at time. Yeah. I somehow or other,
How we still reconnect. I'm not sure yet.
Have to check.
Malati, we wanted to check if you're able to hear us now because we're hoping to hear you and not able to hear you at the moment.
Yes. She disconnected.
So we can close the session.
Okay.
She's disconnected. Yeah. So we can have some chanting now.